Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Board of Supervisors meeting for Tuesday. This will be our open session. At this time, would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Supervisor Garamendi, would you read this, please?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk?
Report of closed session. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, Personnel Matter, conference with labor negotiator Judy Hawkins, Director of Human Resources and Risk Management, regarding Deputy Sheriff's Association, Sheriff's Management Unit, Service Employees International Union, and Calaveras County Public Safety Employees Association negotiations. There was no reportable action taken. Item 2 will be held during the lunch break from approximately 11 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. Item 3, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one case, pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9 D2. There was no reportable action taken.
Thank you. Is there any announcements by the Board of Directors or staff?
Yes, Chair, I have one.
Supervisor Mills.
Good morning. Just so everyone is aware, Mark Twain Healthcare District is renegotiating their 30-year contract for the operations of the hospital and the ancillary pieces. They had a meeting last night that we did have public members, and if anyone is interested, they have another meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning at 7:30 at the library. I would suggest very strongly, if you're going to be voting on this issue, that you need to be aware of what it is, the ramifications of it, because it will have a direct financial impact to that district for whatever decision they make. So it's just an opportunity for the voters to become aware of what that is. Health service is a critical need, critical care need in Calaveras County, and I would encourage everyone to just be involved in that piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Mills. Madam Clerk, could you briefly cover our schedule today as far as time-wise? I know we have a closed session scheduled for lunch.
So my understanding would be that we will proceed with today's agenda until the 11 o'clock hour, and close thereto we would adjourn to closed session for the board to hear item 2, and then reconvene at approximately 1:30 if there is further business to discuss, but to report out as well.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Ladies and gentlemen, I just became aware of one of our county employees that was gravely ill last night. Our hearts go out to him and his family and wish for his speedy recovery. We'll not identify the employee due to HEPA loss, but the bottom line is he's one of our family. At that point, Madam Clerk.
We will go to public comment. Any item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board and is not posted on the consent or regular agendas may be addressed during the public comment period. California law prohibits the board from taking action on any matter which is not posted on the agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the Board of Supervisors. If public comment is completed before the 30-minute allotted time period, the board may immediately move to the next order of business. If public comment is not completed during the allotted time period, it will be continued as the last item of business in order to provide an opportunity for the remainder of comments to be heard.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, public comment is open. Mr. Fry, good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Oliveira and members of the Board of Supervisors. I'd kind of like to piggyback on what Supervisor Mills was talking about earlier with regard to the Mark Twain Healthcare District and Dignity, which Dignity has made a proposal And the district and Dignity have been going back and forth the last couple of years. And there's a couple of things I'd like to point out. One of them is that Mark Twain is one of the top 21 rural hospitals nationally for 2016 for quality and patient safety. Also would like to share with the public on TV that $36 million has been given by Dignity Health in the year 2016 for grants and other things in the community. I would like once again to reiterate that Mark Twain Healthcare District does not run the hospital. Dignity Healthcare runs the hospital. And the healthcare district has a person on the public board to give input. So with that, the hospital is the people in the hospital are the people that run in the executive board of Mark Twain Dignity Health are the people that run the hospital. I attended the meeting last week. There are, let me get to that page. The presenters last week, again last night, and tomorrow morning are Carl Silberstein, who's the Senior Vice President of Financial Operations for Dignity Health. Gary Spa is semi-retired, and he was a Dignity Health executive. And Bob Deal is the President and CEO of Mark Twain Medical Center. So I just hope people get out and find out what's going on with Dignity.
Thank you, Mr. Fry.
You're welcome.
Next speaker. Mr. Segala, good morning.
Good morning. Two items. One of them is repealing the gas tax. We have petitions that anybody can use. I have several of them here. And also, they can be downloaded from their website, reformcalifornia.org. And the petitions call for repealing the SB1, and also future increases in gas tax will be required to have public approval. And I think this really makes sense. We hope to be able to have petition tables at the shopping centers if we have enough volunteers. And now the other item is there is problem in our water district, CCWD, in finances. They run out of money. And they have not identified the amount of possible increase in rates yet, but their leadership will be at our taxpayer meeting tomorrow at 11:30 at the library. If anyone wants to attend that meeting, they need to call me because we have limited seating. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Further public comment? Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, board, staff. My name is Mary Ellen Souza. I've been before you in the past, but today I'm wearing a little different hat. I'm here today as a co-founder and director of an organization called Creative Support Alternatives. I've passed around a packet for each of you. It has our organization's brochure, a couple of recent newsletters, and just a little bit about who we are and what we do. This is our 25th year, and we provide independent living services for adults with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. And so to decipher that a bit, intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities include things such as disabilities such as epilepsy, cognitive disabilities, which used to be known as mental retardation. It's not a term we use anymore. Might include cerebral palsy, other neurological disorders, and a variety of other disabilities. Some of those folks also may have a dual diagnosis, so they have not only a developmental disability, but may experience mental health issues as well. The independent living services part, what we do is assist individuals to access affordable housing. We assist them to get out on their own and live as independently as possible with supports in place, short-term or long-term, depending on what their needs are. We assist them to access health care and provide advocacy support in making sure that healthcare professionals are speaking in a way that the folks we serve can understand. We help them to ask questions and assume as much responsibility for themselves as independent adults as possible. We also connect them to other community resources, educational opportunities, employment opportunities, and in short, work really hard to ensure that the adults with developmental disabilities in our community are responsible, contributing citizens. They are also your constituents. They might also be your family members, your neighbors, your coworkers, your fellow church members. Part of doing what we do involves a lot of teaching and facilitating and connecting. It also involves some cheerleading occasionally. Not everyone that we serve has had the benefit of families wrapped around them, supporting them and guiding them. And so sometimes we step into the role of filling in some of those gaps as well. I mentioned earlier it was our 25th year. I started the organization in San Diego under the San Diego State University Research Foundation umbrella in 1992. When I moved up here and became an immediate permanent resident of Calaveras County, I live in Mountain Ranch, we began providing services here in 2007. So it's our 25th year overall, our 10th year here. My very able San Diego team runs it down there. I'm down there periodically, but my heart and soul and energy is here. I know I just have a quick minute, but I encourage you to take a look at our newsletters. They're written in plain language intentionally, so all folks can understand it. If you have any questions about folks in your district who might need services, we're funded through the Department of Developmental Services Lanterman Act. Thank you.
Further public comment, speakers?
Good morning.
Morning.
I listen to the radio occasionally, and I heard on the radio about a new book, and it's called "Drugs as Weapons Against Us." And these are my own words, it's my conclusions of what the author said, but maybe not his conclusions. The use of drugs and hypnosis as a way to train assassins who are then programmed to kill. And that also refers to some of the horrible things that happen in this world. People doing things, they're programmed. And one person that we were talking about marijuana, and he said, it expands your mind, ma'am. And I'm going, that's the problem, is that it reduces your inhibitions so that you're willing to do things that you otherwise wouldn't do. The use of drugs to make people less competent and easier to manipulate. The use of drugs to turn veterans and others into vegetables. If they use drugs, they must also give up their guns The use of drugs to turn us into sheep, to be herded and sorted into pens. Who would have thought that a country founded on freedom and its ideals would give that up for a toke? Thank you.
Thank you. Further speaker? Good morning, Bonnie.
Good morning, Board. Bonnie Newman from Double Springs. As much as I'd like to give you a wonderful Christmas story from Double Springs, I'm going to continue the topic I started last week on sexual misconduct. I looked up a word called epilogue. It means a closing section added to a novel, play, etc., providing further comment, interpretation, or information. So I'm going to add an epilogue to my Me Too story from last week. If you recall, I spoke of being accosted in the bathroom over there by a county employee, and how it was handled then was to separate the team and give us individual buildings. This was my building, by the way. I didn't address the issue at the time. Neither did my supervisors address the issue at the time. It was kind of swept under the rug, but interestingly enough, I stayed as a janitor for 4.5 years, and the other employee was canned in a few months for misusing county property. So I just think that's kind of ironic. Or maybe it was unauthorized use of county property. I'm not sure what the term was. But anyway, that was 40 years ago. We didn't have a policy. There was no Judy Hawkins then. And I think we've made some incredible progress in Calaveras County. But as a nation, I think we've taken a road of shame. It's true, times have changed somewhat. At least the issues being talked about, but the basic problem is, when you want to get down to it, abusers don't view their behavior as abuse. They consider it as maybe flirting or being friendly, or they don't have empathy. They don't put the shoe on the other foot. What we see is a lot of victim blaming when this situation happens. Something the woman did, or she's a liar. And often we hear a lot of excuses, like, boys will be boys. We hear that all the time to excuse obnoxious behavior. Well, boys may be boys, but pigs will be pigs. And once you distinguish yourself as a pig, there's almost no chance of shedding that moniker, because you're outed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newman. Further public comments? Seeing none, Madam Clerk.
Consent agenda. Consent agenda items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested party may request removal of an item from the consent agenda for later discussion.
Is there any member of the public desiring to pull an item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, any member of the Board of Supervisors or staff desire to pull an item from the consent agenda?
Item 9.
Item 9 by Supervisor Mills. Any further items? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
I would move the remainder of the consent agenda, Mr. Chair.
It's been moved by Supervisor Toffenelli to accept the remainder of the consent agenda. Second?
Second.
Second by Supervisor Mills. Public comment? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed indicate by saying no. Hearing none, motion carries 5-0, unanimous. Supervisor Mills, item 9.
Item
Madam
9
Clerk?
is from the Sheriff's Office to accept State of California Parks and Recreation Boating and Waterways Division Law Enforcement Marine Equipment Grant in the amount of $127,000 and authorize the sheriff to sign the grant. Authorize the transfer of $8,514 from Sheriff AB 443 funds 101-00326 to Marine Safety Fund 101-00360 to provide total funding in the amount of $135,513, of which $127,804 shall be capital funds for the purchase of a rescue and recovery sonar image submersible remote operating vehicle, ROV, for the Calaveras County Sheriff's Marine Safety Unit dive team.
Good morning, Captain Macedo.
Good morning. At the risk of repeating all of that, I will not. I will tell you that I did bring with me today Sergeant Greg Stark. Sergeant Stark has supervised our dive team for a long period of time. He is here to answer any technically specific questions about the device. I can handle any budgetary or process-related questions. So with that, I'll bring Sergeant Stark up here.
Good morning, Sergeant Stark. How are you? Supervisor Mills.
Yes, first of all, thank you, Department, for including the account numbers in the financial statements. You don't know how important that is, but I'm very glad to see it's been very consistently applied. The questions that I had, and I did bring these as questions to the sheriff as well earlier this week. Can you indicate how many times your department could have used ROV equipment in the past several years? I know it's been low water years and not really a lot of activity, but has there been situations?
Yes, last year we had 6 drowning incidents within the county, and then there were several others with cooperative lakes. I know Amador had at least 3 or 4, and so we would have helped out on those also. It could have been used for those purposes.
You had one drowning at Tulloch? Was that the year before last?
That was the year before last. That was a medical aid that we thought was a drowning, but it turned out to be a medical aid.
So in not having this piece of equipment, the amount of time that you're spending at scene is expanded pretty dramatically?
Correct. Not only the time at scene, but the exposure to the divers. Any amount of time underneath the water exposes divers to decompressive sickness or dive-related injury, entanglement. This will allow us to search a larger area much faster and lowering our downtime. Specifically right now, we can only go about 100 feet. This ROV will go much further, up to 500 feet, to recover items and people.
And do neighboring counties have any equipment like this right now? I'm thinking of Tuolumne, Amador, even Stanislaus or San Joaquin.
They have what's called a tow fish or sonar only. This device is unique. It's got a mechanism to actually recover the bodies if it's lower than our lowest depths we can dive.
And have you done any determination on what its life expectancy might be?
We have not. We've talked to the vendor, and it's at least 10 years, depending on how often we use it and maintenance, but it depends on the usage.
Do you feel maintenance costs might be something we need to put in a budget for next year?
I don't. It's going to be minimal, if anything. It'd be gas for the generators, things of that nature. Maybe
And
some additional batteries.
Thank you. Training time?
Training, we have an initial training session with the vendor, and then after that, we'll integrate it into our training with the dive team every other month to stay up to speed.
Is this going to require some type of special certification?
No, sir.
Okay. Those are the only questions that I have at this time, but I appreciate, my only concern would be is that we don't embark on something that we're not going to use a lot, and so it sits in a garage or it sits somewhere. And
Well, specifically last year would be at least 6 times, and it would be a regional asset to our surrounding counties, and it'd be offered to the state for extraordinary circumstances. It can also be used for locating people under the ice, reducing those risks. I know that White Pines freezes over frequently, and we would integrate with Ebbets Pass Fire Department to help coordinate with them. And our lake levels are up, our usage is up. More users means more opportunity unfortunately, for drowning. So I would foresee that the usage would go up.
Okay. Appreciate your time and your responses.
Thank you.
Sergeant, I have a couple of questions. How many people are on the dive team, or certified for rescue?
Right now, there's 5 with 3 open positions.
And are we recruiting those 3 open positions right now?
Yeah, we have actively recruited within the department. We're going through a selection process, and we need to get those people once selected through basic dive school.
Okay. How many bodies of water do we have in the county?
Comanche, Hogan, Tolek, various other lakes, Pardee, and we border, we have some high country lakes that we assist with, specifically Spicers, because it takes Tuolumne so long to come over.
And do you experience any cold weather diving in our area?
We consider all diving cold weather. Once you get below the first thermal layer, it can get very cold, up to 50 degrees. And if you're exposed to that for over an hour under the water, or up to an hour under the water, it takes a toll on the diver. Ironically, we would dive at 50-degree water, and then you come up at 110 degrees, so you can have half your team suffering from heat exposure and half your team suffering from cold-related injuries. So this would reduce our exposure greatly.
Okay. Thank you, Sergeant. Appreciate your time. Further questions?
Sergeant Stark. Thank you, Jim. Does this purchase price include all of the equipment that's needed?
Yes, it comes with...
So it's attached to a cable, I see, so it must go to a screen and that you monitor and control it and so forth. So all of it is a complete package?
It's everything. The monitor, the computer, the carrying case, the extra cord, everything's included in the purchase price, including the initial training.
Okay, thank you. Fish finder.
Inadvertently, yes.
Spear gun?
That was extra.
Any further questions of Sergeant Stark? Madam Clerk, your light's on. Would you like to say something?
I would. So Captain Macedo provided a pamphlet, which I will scan after the meeting, and if any members of the public would like to see it, all they need to do is contact me.
Okay, thank you. I have just one closing comment. If there's no further questions, I am a diver, and I experienced some of the things he's speaking about, but not in the capacity of search and rescue and recovery. That's a very highly technical operation, and it's a very dangerous operation. And I commend the dive team members and also the Sheriff's Department for providing this service, and I would support the purchase of this equipment.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any public comment?
I just have a question about the mechanism, how long it's been in use, so we know that it has a history of being successful. I mean, is it a brand-new machine that's just created, or has it been around for like 10 years, and we know that it's a old faithful use?
Okay. We can answer that, Sergeant? Or Captain?
I'll let the sergeant address that on the doors.
For the specifics about this model of equipment, I'm not sure. I know the company's been in business for several years. We did have a chance to test and use it up at a conference. We did a research and development, if you will. We drove it and spoke at length to the multiple vendors that were there, and chose this one specifically for its durability.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Bonnie? Further public comment?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Board. My name is Bob Reeve. I'm a resident of Calaveras County down in Valley Springs. I'm an attorney in private practice that extends into Nevada as well. I have watched with some concern this issue of cannabis for cultivation for commercial game, because it seems to have attracted an element.
Sir, I'm going to interrupt you for a moment.
Yes.
We're addressing public comment on an individual item on the consent agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Public comment, general public comment has already been completed. It was done at the opening of the regular agenda.
Oh, okay. It's not, so you've already covered that.
We've covered that, sir.
Okay, all right, thanks.
All right, thank you. Further public comment on the agendized item number 9 for the consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. Entertain a motion?
With that, I'll move the item.
Moved by Supervisor Mills.
Second.
Second by Supervisor Toffenelli. Public comment's been conducted. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed indicate by saying no. Hearing none, motion carries 5-0, unanimous. Thank you, gentlemen. Madam Clerk.
Item 12 on the regular agenda is from the Administrative Office to receive a report from staff, Cal OES, and local organizations regarding the ongoing Butte Fire recovery.
Good morning. We're doing interviews for our OES coordinator this morning, so Mr. Moss is not here. We have a couple people to provide comments. And then before we started that, though, I did want to get some general feedback from the board. We're entering we're just on the cusp of doing some of the road projects, but obviously in terms of reports, the Butte fire activities have wound down enough to the point that if the board would prefer these come in as a quarterly update rather than a monthly update as we've been doing, I'd be happy to make that adjustment. I realize it seems like the month comes really quickly and not a lot changes in that 1 month period.
I would like us to continue a month. I think it's actually a problem that things don't change in that 1 month period, as staff is aware. So I like to keep, I think if we push this off, these projects will fall further behind.
And I would see that
Supervisor Mills.
in a broader perspective of staff providing reports on a monthly basis might also be helpful to the board to understand just exactly what are their accomplishments and what things might be coming up in our radar screen in the future that will require some type of policy discussion. If we just wait for it to happen, so to speak, it's a little different. And I'm noticing in other venues that I go to their meetings, there is continual staff reports at least once a month in a written format that then the boards can ask questions and get clarification on things. I just see that as something that might be an advantage in the future that we can look at.
Okay. Further comments by the board?
I agree with Dennis. I mean, I think if we're going anywhere, I would, if we want to, rather than have less, I'd rather have more. Because I'm having to go back and review videotape and find out, to hold staff accountable for what has been promised in the past. So maybe if we need, I don't think we need to go there yet, but that would be, we're looking at the opposite direction than what was suggested, Tim.
Okay. Public
Good
comment?
morning. Or public comment first?
On the proposal by CAO for monthly versus
it seems
quarterly?
like there's pretty clear, comments from the board. I don't think.
Okay. That issue's settled then. We're going to continue monthly.
Good morning. Mel Knight, Butte Wildfire Community Liaison. Glad to be able to report to you. Very timely response, and that we're really nearing the home stretch on the debris removal related to the structures. I've been reporting in the past and will continue to provide written reports as available from our contractor. Also, by the way, as we're nearing the home stretch, I want to introduce a face for you and the public that you may not see but hear the name all the time, Jeremy Denbo. Jeremy? Jeremy is an insurance specialist for Tetra Tech who has been the primary contact with the community as well as with the insurance companies. He's been quite effective, and I think he's served the county and the public quite well in this role. It's been a pleasure to work with Jeremy. I'm also going to mention a little later that Jeremy will transition shortly as we finish this task into doing a similar activity related to the tree removal project. So we'll be taking advantage of some of the efficiencies there. But I wanted you to see the face and place that with the name, and you probably will still see Jeremy down the hall being available to the public as we wind the structural program down and for the next few months at least be involved in the similar related activities for the tree removal.
It's a pleasure to stand before the board.
Welcome, Jerry. Thank you.
On this, I was going to just give you a very brief report on the two program areas. As I mentioned, the structural program is nearing the end. We expect to probably have all insurance company contacts and payments received in the next 2 weeks. That's a significant milestone that we will have reached. There will be some lingering activities that relate to, I think, some checks coming in, some other activities, but we'll be handling that as there'll still be an office presence for a while related now to the tree program. But to date, there's been more than $5.3 million collected. We expect from insurance company records to be receiving another approximately $600,000 to $1 million as it relates to from what's in the pipeline. And we may find, again, that would probably pretty much wrap this up. We would then be forwarding to the state documentation that shows what's been collected and what were the findings. We'll report those to the state. We'll also report to any outstanding properties the information we will be transmitting to the state, so it does not come as a surprise to anyone if we indicate that this one was not closed for whatever reasons. And we'll be sharing that information before that goes out. But that should be happening in the next few weeks. Christmas week isn't probably a ideal time to probably be sending some of that out. So while we hope to have finished by the end of this year for a number of reasons, we may end up that we'll put some of that to the end of the new year, particularly those that may be the least comfortable of the contacts. But that again, very pleased though to report that has gone quite well. As I mentioned, we're going to be transitioning the same team. The Tetra Tech team was already under contract to do the duplication of benefit activity for tree removal. And the same team of Jeremy, Donald Kunish, the manager, and I'll be remaining to do some project oversight to make sure that moves as smoothly as this other has. Again, this has gone as smoothly as possible. The tree program is going to be quite different, though, in that we have a much smaller number. There were 159 property owners recently contacted. 27 have already returned information available to us, and we found 6 are insured, which is a slightly smaller ratio, and which we've received 1 payment. Now, the payments will be both smaller and will be proportionately much less. So we'll be trying to provide a scope of that, which is being developed right now. As I receive the scope and some of the plans, we'll be sharing that with your board and county administration as well. The project, again, I'm working very closely with Jeff Krovitz, and I think that hopefully the efficiencies in all the insurance contacts, all the information sharing and whatever should lead to some efficiencies and effectiveness and improvements in the project process. Any questions from the board?
Supervisor Garamendi.
Excuse me, Mel, I've got that crud that's going around. As always, thank you for your work on this. And I'm glad that we're finally bringing this thing to a close, although I feel like it's the never-ending staircase, and now we've got the trees, so we get to, hopefully we'll learn from this last process. Mel, my question is, as we send this stuff on to the state, has the state given us any indication on where it's going and what their intent is, or is it just going to the black hole?
No, and I doubt that we will receive anything. We'll actually be sending this to CalRecycle, which is the state agency, which will then be dealing with state OES. So we're actually one removed from anyone that would probably do any real follow-up.
Okay.
So we can ask, but one thing we're making it clear is we have no control over what the process is from there. It's our role, again, not to maximize the amount of money extracted from someone, but to see that the obligations, where possible, it would help people meet whatever obligations they have. And if it turns out that some are unable to meet those obligations or choose not to meet those, we'll simply be forwarding those on, and we don't really know what the state may do with that.
All right, well, the sooner we get out of this business, I think we'd all agree
Yeah.
better. And I had long conversations at CSAC with our colleagues on the coast, and many of them, they're working with different organizations, and some of them have already signed these agreements, so, we might be the pointy part of the spear, but we're not going to be the end of this.
I think there's been a lot learned here that's been shared. I'm in routine communication with a lot of these other counties. This is now, as Governor Brown just mentioned, the new normal in California is going to be wildfire management as ongoing programs, not projects. CalRecycle has actually contacted me and others about trying to document these so that this isn't a new project every time, but is actually a program. So I think a lot is going to be done. Training's going to be done statewide. We learned so much and have shared so much. The right of entry documents have been revised significantly. The need to do assignment of benefits. When you go to your doctor or dentist for care, they don't send you the payment and then you have to send the check to the doctor or dentist. Benefits are routinely assigned for insurance payments. Something like that needs to be done, and it is being done on some of these newer fires now.
Right.
So there's some things like that that are going to make this a little less painful. I will say, though, again, having worked in other counties and the state, it's probably best that it be done, something this community-oriented, be done locally if it has to be done. Because, again, if we didn't have Jeremy here in town, if we didn't have the county staff and others available to assist folks in trying to sort this out, I can only imagine if this had to go to Washington or even to Sacramento, they wouldn't be able to meet with folks, they wouldn't be able to get clear explanations like they are getting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions?
Thank
you very much.
Pleasure to have introduced Jeremy.
Welcome aboard. Good morning, Mr. Krovis.
Good morning, Jeff Krovitz, Public Works. Mr. Denbo's been here for 7 months, 8 months now? Almost a year, so it's not welcome aboard. It's welcome aboard to a new portion of the insurance recovery program, which is the debris removal trees. In discussions with the CAO as we are transitioning recovery operations from Public Works up into Office of Emergency Services, because we are nearing the end of or we're hoping we're nearing some sort of a conclusion point with the tree removal program, that is remaining in Public Works. Transitioning to different management at this late date appears to not make a lot of sense. So I will continue to be your tree removal point of contact. So on that subject, as I expressed last month, there were approximately 20 trees out on Hoover Road that were inadvertently left standing that should have been removed. I'm expecting a date for when those trees are going to be felled and when the debris will be removed. From both Tetra Tech and Phillips and Jordan, as you know, we have to establish debris monitors, environmental monitors for archaeological, cultural, and endangered species before we can fell these trees and remove the debris. Secondarily, once we disassembled the Wallace debris management site, we cannot bring trees to a treatment site that hasn't been cleared by FEMA for NEPA clearance, but we can send that debris directly to the biomass plant in Tuolumne County, and there is an established contract between County of Calaveras and, thanks, Sharon. Like you, I've still got it. There's an established contract between County of Calaveras and IHI, the operator of the biomass facility in Jamestown, that returns to us about $28 per bone dry ton of material that's being converted to electrical energy. We don't get to keep that money, of course. We have to forward it back up to the federal government. Otherwise, it would be a duplication of efforts, a duplication of benefit. So again, the punch list on the 20 trees, as soon as we have our monitors lined up, Phillips and Jordan is ready to go. It's just a matter of getting the monitors coordinated. I expect it to be 1 to 2 days worth of work maximum, and then those will be gone. Concerning the BLM trees inadvertently felled, BLM, of course, has given us permission to haul those trees off and dispose those trees. I have requested that Phillips and Jordan give me a cost for the movement of that debris forward to the county roadway and the loading of that debris and the transport of that debris. Currently, I am attempting to get that debris transported to the Red Hill site so that the logs can be milled and the debris can go into the air curtain burner after we exit our fire season. I've reached out to CAL FIRE. They're amenable to that, but of course we're still heavily involved in the fire season as our new normal, mentioned earlier. And in terms of the balance of the BLM trees, we are attempting to schedule another meeting with BLM to hire a contractor to help them with their federal NEPA clearance for the removal of the trees, and we also have to get cost and determine how that will be paid, because FEMA has made it abundantly clear that trees on another federal agency's land are not reimbursement under the Public Assistance Program, and therefore the cost of those are either coming from BLM or the county or some combination thereof to treat the other additional 400 trees. In terms of the next phase of tree removal, I spoke with FEMA at the end of last week. I spoke with the environmental branch because I'm working with them on these punch list issues. They have not yet received anything from their public assistance branch about the request for reversion for the additional 500 plus 1,500 right-of-way and private property debris removal trees on existing parcels that have already been treated. So I've yet to have a response from FEMA to my reversion request of last June. I am hoping that in the near future we can get a direct meeting, including CAO and ad hoc of the board and Cal OES and FEMA to be able to kind of resolve the delays on this. And then the final portion, as I see it, on the debris removal is the removal of existing private property trees that chose not to participate in the public assistance program that are still threatening public right-of-way. The intent on that, unless I hear otherwise, will be to send letters to the private property owners requesting them to remove the liability as quickly as possible for those remaining. Much of that work is happening already. For those of you who drive up and down Mountain Ranch Road on a regular basis, you'll notice that there's changeable message signs up for December 14th, which I believe is Thursday, for the removal of private property trees that are threatening public right-of-way. That's a private landowner who is doing that, and it is a public works requirement that they pre-post and pre-notify of those intermittent road closures on Thursday. So, any questions on tree removal?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just want to compliment that, going up and, there are a lot less trees out there than there were before. And some of those places, when I drove around checking the other day, were cleaned up, thank you. There's still a few green tag trees out there, but I know those are
That's
more
phase.
complex, and there's
Next phase, unfortunately.
just a couple dozen of those I found. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Jeff, you'd mentioned coordination with BLM on those other trees. Is this a larger perspective that maybe we should have the congressman involved or somebody from federal agencies other than who we have now?
Potentially that might be something that needs to occur, but I would like to actually get the lay of the land with members of our Disaster Recovery Ad Hoc Committee, Office of Emergency Services, before we pull the trigger on that type of acceleration.
Okay.
That's my recommendation, at least.
Okay.
Further questions of Mr. Clovis?
Just on trees, right?
On trees. Well, actually, the emergency Butte fire operations.
Oh,
That's what we're on here,
okay.
trees. Did you have another question?
Yeah, I want to know about the project manager for getting the roads redone and how that's wrapping up.
Okay. Would you like to address that, CEO Lutz?
I was happy to address it if you want to discuss where we are at the stage. We did open the RFPs. We had one response, or one responsive bidder. We had a follow-up meeting last week with that bidder to address any potential concerns or questions that we had. I think overall the team, and that was people from Public Works, people from my office, sat down, talked about concerns mostly about making sure that we're maintaining documentation to FEMA standards. And we were very satisfied that this contractor could meet the required documentation. I don't think any of us had any questions per se about the contractor's ability or willingness. so much as could they also meet the federal standards. The people that they brought to the table from the organization were very knowledgeable on FEMA and meeting the reimbursement standards. So I think overall we felt very comfortable with that. So we'd anticipate an actual contract coming to the board then in January.
And they clearly understand that we need to get this work programmed and underway within the next.
Yes, part of what
10
we were
months.
discussing was just that is, and I don't know if Mr. Krovis wants to talk about some of that, but one of our concerns was just that. How can we make sure that we're doing this timely to meet the reimbursement targets on what is now a very aggressive
Because
timeline?
we've already got a year extension, so
Yes.
aggressive by our making. We need to get going.
Thank you.
I actually have another question, and I found it sound like a broken record, but where are we with the dig once policy?
All right, I was
You're ready for
anticipating the
this.
question. So, as with all things in this day and age, what looks like something simple on the outset is actually a lot more complicated. We've done a lot of research already, and we have found other agencies that have done similar things. For example, Sac City, Sac County, City of Portland, Oregon, City of Los Angeles, Nashville, Tennessee has been one of the more aggressive, believe it or not. In 2002, there was a study done by the American Public Works Association on the impacts of underground utility trench cuts into publicly maintained roads and what the impacts are in terms of the expected useful life and accelerated damage. So many of these government entities have established a multi-pronged approach to what you are asking for. They've developed a policy that essentially makes a finding that the board makes a finding that trench cuts to freshly paved roads are not allowed, and there's a moratorium. And that moratorium varies in entities generally between 3 and 5 years. The board also establishes the ability to establish fees associated with underground utility trenches. So it's almost as if it is a fee for the mitigation of potential damages. The reason I suggested that City of Nashville, Tennessee, had one of the better policies is this 21-page document that establishes the nexus, it establishes fees, it establishes fines, and it also spends a significant amount of time outlining the specifications and conditions under which utility trench repair and mitigation occurs. And so for Public Works, what we need to do is pull out the best parts of the research in terms of policies, produce the drawings and the specifications for repairs, establish the board's ability to set a fee and set penalties, and then go ahead and bring it forward to the board so that we have a policy, we have procedures, and that our ordinance reflects the rulemaking. So our intent is that we will start bringing the first pieces to the board in the early February timeframe for policies, and follow that up with the ordinance in March and April, because we have required procedures for that. It's a minimum of a 2-month period. I would like to meet with you, and I will share with you some of this research so that you will have a knowledge base when we sit down and do it. And if there's another board member that would like to be part of this ad hoc committee, I would welcome that as well, so that we could essentially develop this together in concert with what we think is going to be the best for our county and our situations. The last thing I'd like to say is that the next major capital construction project outside of disaster recovery will be Mountain Ranch Road between Highway 49 and Calaveritas. And that project meets the criteria that you have been asking for in terms of a coordinated effort among the public utilities for both communication and power, water districts, lighting, so that we are doing a dig it up once capital project with multiple funding sources to achieve what we are trying to get to. So, and that will be a good example for us to know if we're successful in what we're doing. Finally, I've been working hard for the last couple of months with PG&E on their reconstruction of the streets where they were installing and replacing their gas lines throughout the city of throughout the unincorporated area of San Andreas. And we have essentially sent them back to the drawing board on a number of occasions for not having done a good enough job in terms of the reconstruction of the streets. Pope Street is a very good example of that. Unfortunately, it was accepted by Public Works before we had a chance to get them to come to the table with a better job. And the work that is done up on Market and Broadway on the hill up above and Sunset, we're doing a much better job now in terms of the reconstruction of our streets. And anybody who drives, say, Sunset will see what I'm talking about, comparing Pope Street to Sunset.
Thank you. I know that certainly the PUC has several funds that are available for undergrounding power lines and other things for fire safety and other issues. And so, but it has to be done well with our ordinances and our general plan so that it matches. I think Amador County had some success with doing similar projects in the past up in Volcano, as I understand. I don't know the details, but I think that if we take this approach, it'll be good not just for Butte Fire, but always better to coordinate with our utilities and our internet providers and whatnot, so that we could bring better services and protect that infrastructure.
I think that you're probably referring to the Rule 20A monies.
That sounds right.
So, which is another subject, and there was a meeting, was it last week or the week before, we had with 2 board members and the CAO on Rule 20A funds. They're somewhat specific, and they do require the Board of Supervisors to establish a district before that undergrounding is eligible for those funds. And those are actually not grant funds. They are part of the utility fees that are paid by the ratepayers. But if you know of other CPUC
Those
grants...
are the funds I was referring to.
Okay, all right. And just FYI, we are using Rule 20A funds for the undergrounding of the Mountain Ranch Road project, and it's 2 phases. The first phase essentially goes from the creek crossing, San Andreas Creek crossing, Mountain Ranch Road up to Calaveras Road, and the second phase is that creek crossing where the culverts are to 49. Both of those are incorporated into our San Andreas Underground Utility District. PG&E is nearly complete with their undergrounding design and composite trenching for that. I expect that work to come first. The undergrounding work come first, where they'll put in their conduits and their pull boxes, and then we will do the reconstruction of the road, and after the road is reconstructed and open, then we'll do periodic closures so they can be pulling the conductors and then removing the overhead. Okay. So that's going to be the phase on that. That will take some time because, of course, the joint trench has got AT&T in it, Comcast in it, as well as PG&E in it, and there is some potential impact to the CVIN fiber optic, which is also going through that pathway. So I don't think we're going to be opening up that line or tapping into that line, but we also have to avoid touching it.
I understand. And then, as I mentioned last time we spoke about this, when you were ready to go down to FEMA and talk about the standards that we're going to rebuild the roads to, I'd be happy to join. I'm sure they haven't changed their policy yet, but I want to keep pushing on that. We just simply cannot build something that's not to our own standard.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
So
when you're ready, I'm ready.
Okay. What I'm hoping is that we do have, I believe that there's an ad hoc committee established of yourself and Supervisor Tofinelli, and with the CAO and our Director of Emergency Services, we can get that going. Okay. Am I correct on that, CAO Lutz? In terms of a meeting with Cal OES and FEMA?
Absolutely. I mean, I had sent a note to you already on wanting to work on calendar time, so we'll get that scheduled.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Anything else?
Further questions? Supervisor Mills.
Well, I want to go back to this dig once policy, and remember in the FEMA training we had last year that they said that they would defer their decisions to our policies first. And if we don't have a policy in place, then they're going to ignore it. So if we could bring back to this board some type of a policy, and that if our policy also says that whatever road repairs are done is to bring the road up to county standard, minimum county standard as part of our policy, then that is the direction that we would go from that point going forward. Now, we can't go back and undo what's been done in the previous, but I think that if we're going to protect ourselves into the future, that we just need to establish that as some type of a written desire on the part of this board to do that, and then we'll stop the fight. So I would suggest that we can get together and get some policy put together and bring it back early next year, so that we're beginning to be protected for the next events that occur.
So it sounds like there's a potential desire on the part of the board to establish an ad hoc committee for a dig once undergrounding policy development. Is that what I'm hearing? I would defer to the experience of the clerk and council to let us know how that's to be accomplished.
Council?
Maybe.
Can we look into that and develop an ad hoc committee for that particular purpose, or can that be developed? I know there's certain rules and regs on ad hoc committees, but to develop policy is just a proper way to take this.
And
Go ahead,
Mr. Chair. And you may want to consider that, these are things, we are doing our general plan in the next year. They may start to merge, and this could be something we put into the general plan as a policy.
Certainly, if the board wants to create an ad hoc committee, you have the discretion to create yet another ad hoc committee for the specific purpose for a limited time period. I don't necessarily think that would fall within today's discussion for creation of it, but if that's the board's direction, you could certainly direct staff to bring an item back for creation of this type of ad hoc committee.
I think that this time that'd probably be the way to go, to bring it back for another meeting, preferably first meeting or two in January, and look into an agendized item, develop that ad hoc committee, and then the interfacing with the general plan as Supervisor Garamendi suggested. Supervisor Mills?
Well, I think Supervisor Garamendi had a very important point there, and that is that the general plan needs to be included in this discussion. So if we decide to change a policy, let's be sure that we change the general plan to fit the policy as well.
Yeah.
So it all has to meld together here.
If we get lucky, the general plan will supersede our efforts, and we'll get it all done quickly.
You have high hopes.
I would further suggest that the ad hoc committee consider modifications to our local hazard mitigation plan, because that is the document that FEMA first looks at for standards and established behaviors as adopted by the board. So I agree with you that it needs to be in the general plan. I agree with you that there are probably going to be some ordinance and policies that need to be put into place. But I also think that the local hazard mitigation plan is another area that we need to circle into.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Krovitz. Any further, Mr. Krovitz? Any further on this agendized item? Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 10-minute break right now. We're going to set up for our next presentation. Oh, I'm sorry. Sharon, did you have a comment? I'm sorry. I apologize. We're back in session.
I'm chopped liver today.
You got to stand up and wave.
I'm
No
waving.
offense. No offense.
Okay. Sharon Torrance, Calaveras County Butte Fire Recovery Information Officer. Last time I reported, my report was very brief, but I brought a long report today, so shouldn't take more than an hour or so. This is going to be my last board meeting that I report for Butte Fire Recovery. My last day will be the 31st. So I thought it was appropriate that I kind of reviewed Butte Fire Recovery 2 years later, just from my own perspective. When I first started reporting to you and working with Butte Fire Recovery in September, around the 15th of 2015, I didn't wear glasses. Since then, I have, in the beginning, I had 6 people working with me in the information function. We set up information boards throughout the county because of the lack of communication that's available in the Mountain Ranch and Sheep Ranch in the Butte Fire area. We put on several town hall meetings. We had a very successful open house with over 150 attendees. Since 2015, I've released 243 press releases, I counted. I've worked with other agencies and departments. I've worked closely with Mel and Jeremy and have continued this month to work with their program, putting out press releases, talking to the media. I've done a lot of radio interviews. I actually had Fox 40 come to my house to interview me because they wanted something that day, and as usual, they kind of turned the table to make something that was a positive interview look not bad, but not the way we would want it to turn out. I've had media out with me on site and set up several tours for them, and we've had some good press from Channel 10, Channel 3, Channel 13. I think in lieu of what's happened this year with the fires in the south and in the Santa Rosa area, our event was catastrophic. I think that we're only going to have more significant catastrophic events in the future just because of the weather and the interface. And I think Calaveras County is going to be more prepared the next time, and I'm sure there will be a next time. I've had literally hundreds of phone calls. I'm still getting calls from the public. Just received one this morning from a man questioning the trees that are still standing that were marked. I've been working hard with tree mortality, which isn't part of the Butte fire, but kind of trails along behind because the fire, from what I understand, the beetles are attracted to whatever is emitted from the burnt trees to the healthy trees or stressed trees and cause that. So I think that one follows another. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to work once again with the county. I've not just enjoyed it, I've loved being a part of what has gone on. I look forward to see the county get better and better. I live in Amador, so I'll be watching you. And still intend on being a part of this process. So thank you again. I'm going to miss everybody. I'm going to miss the job. I really do appreciate the opportunity to serve you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Questions?
Sharon.
Supervisor Mills.
Well, I just wanted to briefly say thank you for your service in providing a critical function at a critical time, and with your expertise and your background, it just fit very well. And I don't think we could have done as well without you in that spot, bringing sure that the information was correct and timely. And so appreciate what you've been able to do for us in regaining stability.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Now it's time, public comment.
Thank you. listening to the Public Works Director, I understand that a group of people put together a proposal and presented it, excuse me, presented it to the Calaveras Foundation, and the Calaveras Foundation gave them $50,000. They were asking for a lot more, and I'm curious as to whether the Public Works Director could enlighten us a little bit more. I just heard about this a week or so ago, and they're going to go up, this group of people is going to go onto people's properties and pick up trees that are down. So my curiosity's got the best.
Mr. Fry, is that for the Butte fire or tree mortality?
I don't know which one it is. Maybe the Public Works Director could address that.
I think Supervisor Garamendi.
George, I think you might be referring to the grant given to Central Fire for their tree elf program.
Yeah, that's it.
So
now.
that, you'd be best to probably talk with Central Fire on that
Okay.
one. That's run through them. It's a great program though, and a great one to learn about.
Okay, thank you.
Well, in addition to that point is that Central Fire was available to get more, but they wanted to be sure from the foundation that they were capable of performing and they were doing what they wanted done before so there's more money available to them, that will be available to them, but they've got to show performance.
Is that
George,
for the
you can
Butte
see it on the
fire
tape
or
from
tree
last night.
mortality?
Tree
folks?
mortality. Tree mortality.
Tree mortality?
Correct.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that later on. Thank you, George. We're going to address tree mortality later on the agenda. We've got to keep those two
Yeah,
separate.
they asked for more than 50,000.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, we'll discuss that. We'll discuss that on the agenda item this afternoon.
okay.
All right? Thank you, sir.
I didn't see Public Works on
That's
the
okay.
agenda.
That's all right. Bonnie?
Yes, I just had a question for Jeff, and something he said perked my ears up. He talked about milled wood. Now, I don't know if I've known this or have asked about it, but, you know, I have dementia. Sometimes I forget short term. Do we have a mill in process over there, and what qualifies the wood to be milled, and how come all the wood isn't going over there, and what happens to the milled wood after it's milled?
This is really addressing what's going on at the tree mortality site.
Okay.
So,
Once again, that's a tree mortality issue. It's kind of hard keeping these two entities separate, but we have to, unfortunately. At this time, we're going to take a short break so we can set up for the next presentation. We are going to be going ahead on our agendized item due to the availability of the presenters. We're going to be hearing item 15 next, and we'll hear 13 and 14. Okay, Madam Clerk.
Item 15 is from the Department of Emergency Services to receive a presentation regarding tree mortality project management.
Will, how are you?
Good. How
morning.
are y'all today?
Good.
Good. This is Tad Mason. He is with TSS Consulting, our project manager for tree mortality. He's just going to give you a brief overview of the draft implementation plan.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Will Downs, our new emergency operating, our OES director for Calaveras County. Will does attend the meetings at Task Force in Sacramento with me, where we were yesterday. Welcome.
Yes, good morning. We are very pleased to be here. Again, I'm Tad Mason, licensed forester and the CEO of TSS Consultants. We are under contract with the county as program manager on the tree mortality program. As of late October, we have a contract in place. Today, I'll be reporting on our progress to date, if you will, and what our plans are for the next few months. In your board packet is the PowerPoint presentation. However, the implementation plan did not make it there. I believe you have a hard copy now that's been handed out. We'll be covering that here in a minute. I know we have a hard stop in 6 minutes at 11 a.m. Is that right?
We'll give you a little
Chairman?
leeway on that.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me,
Appreciate that.
just a moment, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Can we get Mr. Moss to please close the door to the chambers, please? Thank you.
Good. With me is my colleague, Dr. Richard Harris. Richard, if you could join me here. Technically, this is the program manager, if you will. I'm the principal in charge, the key interface with the county. However, Richard does the heavy lifting. Come on up, Richard.
Okay.
So we'll step right through these few slides. Thank you, Sharon. So progress to date. We have drafted up an implementation plan that you have, and we'll be going over that here in a minute. Because of the nature of tree mortality in the county, we are currently conducting drive-by surveys county-wide, really though focused right now in the Arnold area, and we're making good progress on that. We started in November. One of our foresters you might know, John Ramina, is heading up that project, working directly for Dr. Harris. As far as procuring names and addresses of property owners with candidate trees, we're working closely with Blue Lake Springs, Pete Palford, and Cal-Am Foresters, Pat McGreevy, and that's going quite well. In fact, Richard and the team met with them last week, so that is going well, as I stated. Next step for us, once we have the candidate trees and properties put together, we will send out a right of entry form. We've worked with Will Downs and the Cal OES as well as County Council to put together a right of entry form that's consistent with the county's best interests. Those will go out to the property owners. Hopefully they will sign them and return them, at which point then we can go out and actually measure those trees and put together a project. The first project will be at Blue Lake Springs and on properties southeast of Moran Road. Next slide. All right. Once we have the ROEs back signed, Richard and the team will put their heads together and come up with our first project. Again, likely they're at Blue Lake Springs, at which point then, starting hopefully sooner than later, March or so, we'll conduct those field surveys, depending on weather, to differentiate between trees that are PG&E responsibility and county responsibility. Of course, when in doubt, we like to have PG&E help us wherever possible, and they've been pretty good about selecting the appropriate trees for their removal. So, next slide. All right, end uses. The way we're setting up the projects, the trees that are removed become the property of the contractor that's removing those trees. So they can be sold to the Ampine facility at Martell and go into composite panels, or they could be sold as saw logs to Sierra Pacific at Standard, for example, or even go export. The Port of West Sacramento is fairly active in exporting logs to the Pacific Rim. So that we think will absolutely bring down the overall cost of the project by marketing those logs, if you will. We anticipate the first projects to be actually implemented in March, April, if you will, after soliciting bids from qualified licensed timber operators or tree service companies. Once we have those bids back from the tree service companies and the licensed timber operators, will assist the county in review and helping select, hopefully, a preferred contractor, at which point we hope to start mitigating or removing trees in May or so of next year. Next slide. All right. Once the contractor is selected and the trees are starting to be felled, we'll be monitoring those contractors very closely with our licensed foresters, again, working directly under Dr. Harris here. And we'll be coordinating closely, though, with the IT and GIS staff here at the county. Stan Moore has been very helpful for us in our interaction with that team. There's a wealth of knowledge and data there that resides with your GIS team, as you know. In fact, they've just finished programming our iPads, which we'll be using in the field to locate properties where these candidate trees are located. Once the projects are completed, we'll coordinate with Will and the administrative staff to assist with actual invoicing of Cal OES for reimbursement back to the county. We'll also be updating the board here monthly. That was a specific request made by Cal OES and Will and Brian, if you will, as well as generating progress reports monthly. We also intend to work closely with with Sharon. We're in discussions now with Sharon on her securing her assistance after the first of the year to help us with outreach. Dr. Harris is well versed in conducting outreach, having been part of the University of California Extension staff for 2 decades.
Long time.
Long time. Not much hair on that head left, I know. Next slide. Okay, so implementation plan you have in front of you, and we've also handed out to the audience. This is basically detailed steps that we would like to proceed with to implement this project and hopefully facilitate removal and mitigation of 3,000 to 8,000 trees. We're still not sure about the total count, but you know, in the spirit of time, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want to go through this in detail, but this is basically the plan. Think of it as a roadmap.
I'd like to interject a little bit here on the reason for the plan being presented to you is that we feel that if you adopt the plan by resolution, that, you know, provides us with, I guess I would just call it some assurances. And so that's what we would propose to you, is that maybe not at this session, but when you've had a chance to review it and go forward with it, maybe at the next session of the board, that you would actually adopt it by resolution. And in the meantime, between now and then, if you have comments, then we would address those comments at the next meeting.
Yeah, that's going to have to be done in a different session than this one.
Right.
That'll be agendized, and we'll take care of that. I think we're going to need time to look over this plan. As I read this, and just a quick glance in your presentation, we're not going to cut down a tree until next June, right?
No, I would say April, May.
April, May?
Yeah.
The turnaround really depends on the right of entry process and when we get those right of entry forms back. And so in the right of entry form that we've developed, we ask for those to be returned within 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're working closely with the Blue Lake Springs and Pine Creek HOAs to try to, you know, get the projects moving, right?
Right.
But one of the problems you have with that is that, you know, only like, I guess about 20% of the people that own the properties there live there. So doing local outreach, you know, a little problematic. We'll be
20% might be stretching it.
Yeah, so, but we'll do the best we can to get those right of entry forms turned around and brought back to us. We don't have any problem with winter ops.
Okay.
Winter operations, we have, you know, there'll be provisions for that in our permits with CAL FIRE. So it just, keep your fingers crossed that the right of entry forms come back quickly, and then we put the project together.
Okay. We'll be watching that.
One way to expedite those right of entry forms, from our experience, is to conduct workshops locally.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be working closely with Sharon to do that in the Blue Lake Springs area for project number 1. Project number 2, we'll probably expand and go to, say, West Point or Mountain Ranch. We haven't decided yet where project number 2 will be.
Actually, this is where the project manager comes in. Okay, so working with Pete Padelford.
I know Pete.
Yeah, good old Pete. What we've decided is that we're going to focus to the east of Moran Road, the Blue Lake Springs units there, and then Pine Creek. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to go west of, the next project will be west of Moran Road. We'll pick up the rest of the Blue Lake Springs units. So we'll be jumping over to West Point to do our drive-by survey pretty quick here.
Right.
But we're going to, you know, our projects are going to be concentrated in the Arnold area initially.
Where is the most devastation, in your opinion? Is it going to be up in Arnold versus West Point?
Where is what?
Where's the worst infestation where we have to have trees removed?
Arnold's pretty hard hit, but a lot of the trees have been removed already because of the SRA grant,
Right.
and because of PG&E. West Point is also another centroid. I mean, the Cal-Am foresters and your own staff I mean, Stan's group, have developed maps that show where the concentrations of mortality are. West Point's certainly one of them. Arnold's another one. So, and then there's various other areas that are kind of scattered around. We've got a map where we've kind of sketched out all the different centroids of mortality, which will be the foci for project areas. We're going to develop that map and refine that map so that Stan's group knows, where we're going next. But that's kind of operationally where we're going next is we're going to stay in the Arnold area to begin with.
I understand winter is coming, so there's not a lot you can do in winter.
Isn't that your district?
Questions of the presenters?
Yeah.
Supervisor Toffenelli.
Yeah, I have some questions, and I'm not sure where it fits in on this program, but I believe it needs to be addressed. Last Tuesday, we had a presentation by our Public Works Director, Jeff Grobitz, excuse me, to which he stated that we had some winds the previous weekend, and 17 tree mortality trees fell. We're heading into the winter, and there are my concerns, I'm sure I share them with the members here and the public, that what are we going to do in the interim of this program? And since you're involved in this tree mortality portion of it, is to take care of any trees that fall between now and when a contractor comes on board. How are we going to address those problems? Because if 17 fell the first time we had winds, there's plenty more that's going to fall, and that doesn't even record any in the backcountry that weren't visible at the time. So is any part of this program going to address any of that?
I'd like to comment on that a little bit because we've got experience with that a little bit now. The trees are starting to break up. Some of them have been standing there for 4 years. They're starting to fall across the roads. The trees are on private property. They're not in public right-of-way, so we actually can't go on those properties and remove those trees until we have the right of entry forms returned. If and when a tree falls across the county road, then it becomes a responsibility, of course, of the county to maintain egress and ingress. They have to go out and, cut the tree up or remove it or whatever. Now, who is liable if one of those trees falls on a county road and damages a vehicle? I think that's for your county council to decide. We can't go on the private property and take those trees out unless we have the right of entry form, so we're kind of hamstrung there.
Well, we're going to start the right of entry program here shortly. So some of those trees, we may have a right of entry form signed in the interim before we get a contractor on board. So I understand exactly what you're saying about right of entry. But there's another part of this to which was spoken of earlier about the insurance aspect of it and whether the property owner has insurance or not.
Doesn't cover them.
That doesn't cover them. Okay.
Nope. It's really kind of strange that people would actually have dead trees on their property that pose a risk to their assets or to others' assets, and they don't realize that they are not covered by their homeowner's insurance because it's a known hazard.
Yes, and I was in an RCRC conference here last week, and what's apparently happening at this point is insurance companies are refusing to renew their insurance and cutting them, and they're finding it very difficult or very, very costly to get insurance, which is part of their mortgage, which requires it. And so they're trying to introduce legislation now that prohibits them from doing that. I don't know how far successful it's going to be since insurance companies are their own entity. But it applies upon some very dangerous aspects here of what possibly could happen, not only falling on a car that's occupied going across a country road, but falling on homes with people asleep at night, killing people. I mean, it's a very drastic thing. I bring it up, but it's very possible it could happen here. And so as we start this program and we get right of entries, is there some way that if that's the case and these trees fall, and we have that right of entry, that we can secure some way to go in and get these trees removed?
In an expedited fashion.
Yes.
Well, it's kind of, the question is whether you want to contract on a tree-by-tree basis or you want to contract for projects. So, if, for example, in Tuolumne County, they have actually contracted for the removal of one tree, one hazardous tree, okay? And it would be possible to set up a system like that where you would have contractors that would be pre-qualified, that would be essentially on a work order basis. I mean, that's something to consider. I mean, we could talk to Will about setting it up that way as opposed to the way we've been doing it, which is on a project basis.
And I think that's a conversation that we need to have at the board level and
Yeah.
in the ad hoc committee.
Very relevant thing to try to consider, because then, as a right of entry form comes in, you go take action.
My suggestion might be to go down both paths, where if you're contracting for the bulk of those trees, but have something set aside where if we come up with an emergency basis, we know we have the contract in place, and we can then address those one-off trees that pose a imminent threat, that we can go in and take out.
Excellent suggestion.
Okay. I think we can discuss that. But that is an issue that needs to be addressed, especially in my district where we did have that happen at the fire station.
And I agree with Supervisor Toffenelli that that would be a nice thing to have. Certainly it would take a little pressure off Public Works. Their road crews are busy as heck all winter and summer and spring and fall anyway. So this would be a nice asset to have. But I like the idea of the projects. I know we've discussed before that you're breaking them into smaller projects so that some of our local companies will have the capacity to take them on.
That's the intent.
Which would be great. I mean, we want to do the right thing by cleaning these up, but it's also good to do well by the community and build our capacity for this type of work.
Let me suggest one other thing here, because this reminds me of a situation, has to do with, storm damage, prioritizing sites, for treatment in terms of storm damage. One thing that we could include in our data collection would be an assessment by the forester as to the imminence of the hazard. Is this tree really, more hazardous than the tree next to it? Is it positioned such that it poses a risk not just to the road but to a structure? I mean, perhaps we can talk about that with, with Stan and his crew as in terms of our data collection. We could actually prioritize the trees in terms of the risk.
If I might, I just want to, before we sign off, I want to compliment you guys on the approach that you're taking, which is a very personal approach. We wanted to go with the local company so we could pick up the phone and call when there's an issue. And you've been very responsive, and you're in the community, so when we talk about a road, you don't have to get out a map. You know what we're talking about. And also want to give a compliment to Stan and the GIS team. I know they're getting recognized statewide for their work, but it's really been outstanding. So compliments to all your team, Stan.
Yeah, I share Supervisor Garamendi's comments. CAO Lutz, can we take a look at that issue and discuss that and maybe make modifications where it's necessary?
You're talking about those small subcontractors?
That's right.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
OES team is here now. They'll be working on it.
Thanks. Gentlemen, is there anything else?
Pleasure to work with you.
Oh, we're going to have fun together.
Careful. Oh, we'll be back monthly for updates.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
While we're on the subject of tree mortality, I did want to add to it, because this has been a question of concern, and we've finally gotten enough guidance from the state on the local assistance for tree mortality, or LATM grant, as they're calling it. And basically what that grant does is lets us, as we know, tree mortality is a state disaster, local
Correct.
Emergency, so it's not eligible for federal funding. So we have a normal 25% match. What that LATM does is lets us use those funds to offset our 25% local match up to the cap of that. So how the state did it, they identified 10 of the high priority counties or highly impacted counties for tree mortality, of which we're one. The estimate is we have roughly 13% of the state's dead or dying trees within our county, which places us about third highest, with 3 counties ahead of us because 2 are at a tie. So
Supervisor, I'm sorry. What is the total amount of those funds?
That's what I was going to say. Then that next thing. So what that means, the formula allocates to us $679,196 specifically identified for us to be used for the 25% match requirement. So that the trick for that, like anything, and so I'm really pleased at the progress that TSS is making, is this was the state's answer to counties of, we want you invoicing, we want you getting these programs going, is we're giving you an allocation, so we're in a good spot. It's not a race that everybody has to draw down the money first, but they want us to be getting the programs going and actually invoicing against those.
And they're tracking that very closely in Sacramento. Who's using those funds and what the results are. That's the reason I brought up the issues that we need to get on the scorecard. Okay. Any further?
Can I add something a little bit that I just learned yesterday?
Sure.
I just learned yesterday that, the Cali OES reimbursement formula is 75% of your costs, right? Total costs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but I learned yesterday that, and it was real interesting to me, when you calculate the total cost and you get reimbursed for that 75%, you also get reimbursed for 10% of that 75% as an administrative cost. So in essence, it's not just 75%, it's 75% plus 10% of the 75%, which further offsets, your local match.
Okay, thank you. We'll take a look at that. I'm sorry, Madam Clerk. Public comment, please.
Yes, I had a question for the tree mortality folks. I understand that the contractors who haul the wood out, that becomes their wood, their lumber. They take it to the mill over there at Red Hill, and that's their lumber. Is there any possibility of local residents obtaining any of this blue wood? And can somebody bring some so we could see it sometime? Because I'm really interested in seeing how it turns out.
I think for the process of clarity, when reference was made to the contractor, that's the actual contractor removing the trees. Is that correct? It's not TSS. They're the project managers. And that's part of their contractual agreement with TSS and with the county. As far as the blue stained wood issue, that is becoming very popular, I understand, in Sacramento, through our resources that we have with the state governor's task force, and even through our private industry, SPI. I'll try to find out more information, see if I can get you a sample. How's that?
And then a follow-up question, could there be any enticement to the contractors to sell some of the wood on site where it's milled, or to make it available to Calaveras County residents? Because that's our wood.
I understand, but that's a contractual agreement. I don't know if we'll be able to interfere in that. But I do see your point. That is our wood to an extent, but we got to give it to them if it's under contract.
Yes, but just to be clear, those right of entry forms we'll be sending out to the private property owners. There is a box they can check that says, please leave the timber.
Sure.
Please leave the logs. So if it is private property, if they decide to keep that, we can make that arrangement, in which case they could be made available.
That's something we'll discuss.
Something to think about.
Thank you very much. Any further public comment? Seeing none, I guess we'll adjourn for our closed session. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We'll be back at
I would say
2:30?
quarter to 2.
between 2 and 2:30.
2?